Welcome back to Global Affairs Today. I'm Rams, and we're diving into some of the most provocative instances of US foreign policy in recent times. We've got a lot to cover, so let's jump right in.
Absolutely, Rams, and thanks for having me. It's really fascinating to look at how U.S. diplomacy is shifting gears in these distinct scenarios.
Right, we've seen US actions in Venezuela, over Greenland with Denmark, and even in India with some intense tax disputes. It almost feels like these policies are part of the same, bigger pattern of aggressive posturing. What's your initial reaction?
Well, it certainly appears that we're witnessing a more confrontational, transactional approach where strategic and economic interests seem to trump traditional notions of long-standing alliances and diplomatic nuance.
Yeah, exactly. Take Venezuela, for example. For years, the US has maintained that hardline position against Maduro. We're talking sanctions, diplomatic isolation, and even threats that border on military rhetoric. What do you think the driving force is behind this
Yeah,
intense focus?
I think it's all about oil and the promise of democratic reform, or at least a rebranding of what legitimate governance looks like. Venezuela, with the world's largest proven oil reserves, is too significant not to worry about. And these actions also try to tie into broader regional stability in the hemisphere.
Right, but then you have the humanitarian side. Millions have fled Venezuela, creating a severe refugee crisis. Some argue that sanctions are even exacerbating the collapse that's pushing people out. But the US claims regime change would ease the suffering. How do you see that
Mm,
balance?
That's a deep ethical conundrum. On one hand, the sanctions target a regime accused of widespread abuses. On the other, they're picking at the economic fabric that's making life unbearable for millions. It's a moral dilemma, using pressure to try to restore democracy while potentially worsening immediate suffering.
Yeah, it's like trying to fix a leak with a sledgehammer, right?
Exactly, and that analogy really captures the tension here.
Moving on to something even more unconventional, Greenland. I mean, discussing the potential purchase of Greenland is something out of a Cold War spy novel. We're not, in 1917 anymore. What's behind
Yeah,
this renewed interest?
it's a fascinating pivot. Greenland's resource richness, like its rare earth minerals, combined with its strategic military positioning in the Arctic, makes it incredibly valuable today. Add climate change opening new shipping routes, and you have a recipe for global power shifts.
Right, but the tone of those discussions, particularly the idea of purchasing Greenland, has really rubbed Denmark the wrong way. Why is that such a big
Mm.
deal?
Well, Denmark, as a long-term NATO ally, expects a level of respect in their sovereignty. When American policy seems to treat Greenland almost like a commodity, it's seen as dismissive. And let's not forget, the Greenlandic people have their own aspirations. They don't appreciate being treated as pawns in diplomatic chess.
I kind of get that. It's one thing to have strategic interests, but when you overstep boundaries with friends who are also partners, it raises serious trust issues. Would you say
Yeah,
this could cause long term rifts?
potentially, yes. While Denmark is likely to stay within the NATO fold, these kinds of actions can create undercurrents of resentment. It sends a message about how U.S. priorities might sometimes come at the expense of allied respect.
Now, let's skate over to India, which brings another twist to American foreign policy. We're talking about a tax dispute that's hitting major tech companies. Why is this
Mm.
even a heated issue?
India's challenge lies in its efforts to tax digital services, mainly because many of these American tech giants have um, historically enjoyed favorable tax conditions. It's a classic clash. America's push for international standards versus India's drive to protect domestic markets and ensure fair taxation.
Interesting, because on one hand, India is a vital strategic partner in countering China's influence in
Right?
Asia, yet here they are clashing over economic policy. Isn't that contradictory?
I get what you're saying, Rams, and it is a bit contradictory. India values its strategic partnership, but also fiercely defends its economic sovereignty. When America's hardline strategy turns into ultimatums over trade and tax issues, it risks alienating India. And that's where you see inequality between strategic interests and immediate economic disputes.
I'm just thinking, if the US really needs India as part of its Indo Pacific strategy, wouldn't such threats backfire, strengthening India's resolve to diversify its partnerships? What do you
Mhm.
think?
That's a fair challenge, Rams. In fact, there's a lot of urgency on India's side to assert strategic autonomy. Persistent pressure might push them to seek closer ties with alternatives such as the EU, Japan, or even Russia. Nobody wants to be cornered by economic wariness from a country that also turns into a security partner.
So, combining these three cases, what broader trends do we see emerging in American foreign policy?
We're clearly seeing a shift towards a more transactional and sometimes aggressive approach. It's all about leveraging economic and strategic threats to get immediate concessions. The mindset seems to be that a tough stance can correct course, but it's a risky game when allies or partners get burned in the process.
Right? And it's almost like that pressure cooker scenario where short term gains could come with long term costs. It's like, well, these actions can push allies to hold back their support or even pivot to other partnerships.
Exactly, and let's not forget that as global dynamics shift, America is no longer the only power to dictate terms. Countries are increasingly asserting their sovereignty and, in some cases, coordinating responses to counter U.S. pressure.
I've also noticed that this kind of aggressive stance can be self-defeating. For instance, the idea that threats in Venezuela might force regime change hasn't necessarily eased the humanitarian crisis, and it may actually worsen perceptions of U.S. intent.
Absolutely, Rams. It's a classic double-edged sword. The tougher measures may yield tactical wins, like pushing regimes into isolation or forcing negotiations, but the reputation cost and potential collateral damage can undermine longer-term strategic goals.
Now, one thing I want to challenge here a bit, Maria, don't you think that sometimes these aggressive tactics, like the tax threats with India, might actually be a calculated risk that can pay off if managed right? I mean, isn't there a case to be made for a tough stance in negotiations?
That's a great point, Rams, and it's definitely the argument from the proponents of this approach. But my concern is that when you mix tough diplomatic language with actions that affect not just adversaries but also allies and strategic partners, you risk isolating yourself. In India's case, for example, the pressure might just backfire and tilt them away from U.S. influence, a major long-term gamble.
True, true. It's like trying to balance on a tightrope. One misstep and you could fall off the strategic ladder. It's a high-stakes game for sure.
Exactly. And then there's the broader international context. As other global players like China and Russia watch these moves, they're ready to step in as alternative partners. That really complicates the U.S. picture even more.
Now, thinking ahead, what should we keep an eye on? Which of these issues do you think might cause a major shift in international alliances?
I'd say all three warrant attention, but the dynamic with India is particularly intriguing. If U.S. pressure continues, India might accelerate deeper cooperation with other regional players or even cast in a more independent light. That, in turn, could reshape the Indo-Pacific strategic balance significantly.
Right, and with Greenland, if diplomatic tensions with Denmark and the Greenlandic community deepen, it might prompt Europe to reassess US reliability on issues that affect continental security. There's a lot riding on perception and credibility here.
Definitely. And in Venezuela, long-term stability in the region might hinge not only on the internal dynamics of Venezuelan politics, but also on how external pressures are handled. If sanctions push the country further into isolation, it could open up opportunities for other powers to fill that vacuum.
So, in a nutshell, we're looking at a multifaceted approach where economic leverage, strategic signaling, and sometimes heavy-handed tactics intertwine. It's a bold, if risky strategy that could yield short-term wins but might hurt multilateral trust in the long run. Would you say that's an accurate wrap-up?
Absolutely, Rams. The approach shows a willingness to meet challenges head-on, but it also reveals vulnerabilities. Trust and long-term alignment, especially among democratic allies, are critical assets that might be compromised by such a transactional method.
All right, so as we move forward, the key for observers will be watching how these tensions evolve, whether allied nations begin hedging their bets or even find new, more reliable partnerships. It's a real diplomatic tightrope.
For sure. And it reminds us that in international relations, actions have repercussions that extend far beyond the immediate situations. This is a space that demands careful, nuanced strategy, not just knee-jerk reactions.
Well, that was an engaging deep dive into some of the major threads of current American foreign policy. Maria, thanks so much for unpacking these complexities with us.
Thanks, Rams. It's always great to chat about these critical issues.
And thanks to everyone tuning in to Global Affairs today. Keep an eye on how these stories develop because the next few months are sure to bring even more twists. Until next time.